most of the problems in people who have gut issues or GI issues is the lack of beneficial functions, and their gut results come back really much better than before. So they take these tests to their GI specialists, and usually the GI specialists are like, I don't know what this is this horoscope? We're met with a lot of skepticism, and I understand why, because again, this stuff is not taught in medical school. When doctors see symptoms improving, when previously they just couldn't help the kid, they turn around and they like, well, I want to talk to Tiny Health. I want to learn more about the test. The biggest eye opener for me is shift in paradigm shift from killing to restoring. So instead of coming from kill, restore, you come from restore, replenish, and then if that doesn't work, you kill.
Cheryl Sew Hoy, a very warm welcome to the Scope Forward show. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a very long time. So here we are, really excited to have you and looking forward to learning more about Tiny Health and about what you're doing with the gut microbiome.
Thank you, Praveen. I am very excited to hear that we were in the front page of your book, right? You mentioned the shift.
Exactly. So just about the time when the shift was about to go for publishing, so the introductory chapter, I was writing it, and my brother sent this article from the Washington Post, a story about a mom and child. Mom couldn't find the answers to her daughter, and then finally you helped her, or your company helped her, and the problem went away. And the solution was also very, very interesting. For me, that gave me insight that this is the new world, and the solutions are shifting towards digital health, which is the crux of my book. So that's the angle that I took. But I'd love to know more on how you got started with the company.
That mom, Angelica, her daughter has a form of allergy that's kind of used to be rare, but we're seeing more and more of it today. It kind of relates back to my own personal story. So I have 3 kids now. I have a 6-month-old, my third child. I also have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. So my 7-year-old, my first child, was born by a C-section. And so that was really when I dived into the research in terms of like realizing that a C-section born baby has a really different looking gut from a vaginally born baby. And so it was kind of like, oh, what is the science behind it? So baby is pretty sterile in the womb. They don't have any gut bacteria, gut microbiome. They get the first colonization on their way out through labor from the mom. So the vaginal microbiome first through the vaginal canal, and then some gut microbes seed the baby from fecal fluid during labor and birth. So it sounds gross, but that's how nature intended for us to get our microbiomes from our mom, frankly. And then beyond that, breast milk, breastfeeding, the mom is continuing to transfer her gut microbiome to the baby through breast milk, which is really fascinating. So when I was reading all about this and I had the C-section, one, the baby was not being exposed to my vaginal microbiome or my fecal microbiome. So the baby's not getting seeded with the right microbes from me. And then 2, through the operation, the C-section, I was given antibiotics, right? So baby in the room had the antibiotics I had too. So whatever they got, they're getting wiped out anyway. And so these babies tend to have more atopic allergic conditions, which starts with eczema. And then usually eczema morphs into food allergies, and food allergy morphs into asthma, and asthma morphs into hay fever, or the hay fever could come before the asthma. So is this kind of like progression of allergic diseases that starts with usually with eczema. But even there are early signs, even before eczema, the baby could be very colicky, don't sleep really well, like fussy. They could have like GI issues and things like that. Could be diarrhea, could be constipation. So a lot of what you think is common baby symptoms can be related back to the gut of the infant being imbalanced. So I was trying to figure out how to course correct. I ran through a lot of literature that shows that early intervention can really prevent these conditions. There's something called the C-section signature. So if your baby C-section signature kind of goes to 0 by the time they're 1 year old, they're 4 times less likely to get asthma. I was trying to figure out, oh my gosh, like, am I doing all the right things? I'm breastfeeding, I'm giving her kefir, I'm like doing all the microbiome healthy stuff. There was no tests for babies, infancy. A lot of the stool tests in the market are for adults and using adult reference ranges, which are wrong for babies. It's the opposite. And like you and I, we're old now. We want high diversity in our guts, which means we have a really resilient gut. The higher diversity, the more resilient. In babies, you actually want the opposite. You want low diversity in a baby's gut because the sole job of the baby's gut is to digest breast milk, mom's breast milk. And so there are only a couple of microbes that is really, really adapted to doing that. Bifidobacteria, certain strains of bifidobacteria. So I was looking for that. And I was looking for a test that can tell me, does my baby have B. infantis, B. breve, B. longum, B. bifidum? No tests told me that. That was when I was like, okay, maybe I should start this company. But it wasn't until I was pregnant with my son, that I started the company. Actually, in fact, I started the company a week after he was born. And then the follow-up to the story was that then I tested my microbiome, my vaginal and my gut microbiome, because what if my gut and vaginal microbiome was not in good shape? Then would I be passing it on to baby, right? And sure enough, I didn't have bifidobacteria. I had none of the bacteria that even through a vaginal birth, I was supposed to pass on to my babies. And Praveen, this is what's happening to our society today. A lot of issues with chronic conditions in grown-ups, adults, or even kids is because of the absence of beneficial bacteria in the mom, in the dad, and hence in the baby, whether or not vaginally born or C-section. Of course, C-section and antibiotic overuse is one of the reasons why a lot of beneficial bacteria is not being transgenerational. Like, if the mom didn't have it, baby is not going to have it, and then their baby's not going to have it, right? So it is a problem in our modern lifestyle. And Tiny Health was built to help parents and just regular adults like you and I understand what we're missing. How can we restore it, not just for our own health right now, but for our kids' health?
You've done amazingly well in a very short time, right? Like, so you've helped about 55,000 families and individuals. It's more
Over
than
80,000 now. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we're
that.
fast hitting 100,000 soon.
That's awesome. Congratulations. And one big question that I have, and I want to back up a little bit from the company, but to the microbiome space itself. Question that I have is how far are we with the science of the microbiome itself? And because when I talk to some gastroenterologists, they say that startups which are out there, there's a lot of hype, but we don't know what we don't know. So I want to ask you, what do we really know? And do we know what we don't know about the microbiome?
That's a great question. So, kind of winding back, what is the microbiome, right? There are 38 trillion microbes living in and on us. There's the skin microbiome, there's the oral microbiome. I talked about the vaginal microbiome, and then the gut microbiome. But there's tons more sites. The gut microbiome is equivalent to what we hear gut health, the trending term right now, right? Especially on TikTok and whatnot. The reason why the gut microbiome is so commonly talked about is because it's the most accessible through the stool. And mind you, it only can represent the large intestines, not the small intestines. So in our GI tract, obviously, I don't have to educate the GI doctors out there, but I do think it's worth clarifying when we say leaky gut, for example, that actually technically tends to refer to the small intestines because that's where food and nutrients are being absorbed, right? And it's not till the large intestines that water is being absorbed. But that is where most of the bacteria functions are for gut health. That's beyond digestion. It's also immune system is there, also in the small intestines too. But there's a lot of functions that are produced in the gut. For example, 90% of your serotonin is produced in the gut. 50% of your dopamine is produced in the gut. Your gut produces 400 times more melatonin than your pineal gland. So the gut has many functions, gut brain. That's why you hear the gut brain connection. There's the gut skin connection and all that. So it is a lot. And I would say academically, a lot of papers are being published and it's really exploded in the past 10 to 20 years. So if a doctor went to school, maybe 30 years ago, 20 years ago, they may not have been educated in this topic. Even now, I don't think schools have caught up and taught this topic. The most common thing I've heard is, oh, the science is not there yet, right? Like, there's one, the science is not there yet for clinical utility. Two, the other thing I've heard is there's no universal healthy microbiome. What I'll say to that is, I'll start from the universal healthy microbiome. We're not looking for a universal healthy microbiome. You grew up in Mumbai or in India. I grew up in Malaysia and Southeast Asia. Now I live here. There's many different kinds of healthy microbiome. But what we can do and where the science is now is that we know the features of a healthy microbiome. So we're not looking for one unique like healthy microbiome. Like you and I, maybe there are some components of your microbiome that are healthy, some components of mine that are healthy. For example, Prevotella. Prevotella is a bug that loves fiber. We call it the fiber-loving bug. We see more of Prevotella guts in India and Southeast Asia and non-industrialized, less industrialized countries, right? You know about short-chain fatty acids,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so essential, and specifically butyrate, because there's butyrate, propionate, acetate, a few other ones, but butyrate is the most important for gut lining, metabolic health, a variety of reasons. We can measure if your gut microbiome has the potential to produce butyrate functions, butyrate. And then we can also measure the metabolites. We have a pro test, a clinical grade version that can measure the actual metabolites of butyrate. But that goes to show if someone doesn't have butyrate or high butyrate or acetate, then they're most likely their gut lining is impacted, right? So again, we're not looking for one high level score of a healthy microbiome. We can map if you have butyrate function, like do you have digestive capabilities for fiber digestion? Do you have too much protein, TMA, too much BCAA, chain amino acids? We can actually see digestive factors. And then we can also measure things like GABA production capabilities, which is your Zen-like molecule for your gut-brain connection. So if you don't have any GABA production, then you may feel more anxiety, right, when you're doing things. So these are all basically papers that are being published in academia right now that we can actually map to your stool tests and show you if you have these functions. And if you don't have these functions, there are clinically evidence-backed ways to increase it through diet, certain supplements, and lifestyle changes. By the way, we don't sell supplements. We are against, I think, microbiome testing companies who do sell supplements because we think there's a conflict of interest. So we care a lot about recommending evidence-based, clinically backed supplements. We don't even make any money from referring you to supplements. Ideally, we recommend that people do food, right? Food as medicine. But, Americans we love the silver bullet. We like the easy way out. We would always recommend eating the right foods to accompany the supplements because long-term, you want the diet to really sustain and maintain your healthy microbiome instead of taking supplements. The idea of supplements is to go in there, do its job. When it's done, remove the supplement and maintain through diet. That's our approach.
One idea or suggestion that has done the rounds or is doing the rounds is that the microbiome could be its own medical specialty going forward. So, how far do you think we are from that day, if you also believe in that idea?
Its own specialty. Well, what do you mean by that? Because I think it is.
Like gastroenterology is a medical specialty. Could microbiome be a medical specialty going forward? Like, because, it's going to expand to that degree that it qualifies for, being a specialty.
I think so. I would love to see that. I see what you mean now. I would love that being the specialty that's taught in schools, in medical schools, for example, because there is so much linking back to the gut, right? Like 90% of chronic conditions and ailments can be linked back to gut dysfunction or gut imbalances, right? And that's even just in adults. And with the CDC stats today, 78% of adults have at least one chronic condition. That's a norm right now, but it should not be the norm, right? So 78% in adults and 40+% in kids, school age kids, which is we're getting a sicker and sicker population. And the hypothesis there is that our gut is depleted. Like I mentioned earlier, we're depleted of beneficial functions and beneficial bacteria because we are overusing antibiotics, sometimes antibiotics are needed, but as a society, we've become too much of a just in case. Let's just prescribe something to kill, right? And the other thing I want to talk about is conventional stool testing using qPCR methods or culturing methods are very pathogenic focus. If you have a GI issue and you go to the hospital, most likely your doctor is going to prescribe you a very limited panel that is based on your E. coli or Shigella toxins, Salmonella, and then a parasite panel, right? Again, that could be the issue, but sometimes that could be missed. That story in the Washington Post that you read, I believe that mom or another mom who in our testing group did the same thing, brought her child to the doctor, to the hospital. They did a pathogen panel. They didn't find anything. But the problem with these kits, a lot of these kits, is the missing beneficial function. And that's what their panels are missing. So we use a technology called shotgun metagenomic sequencing. So this is a whole genome sequencing. It's considered next-gen sequencing, where you can see everything in the gut, not just bacteria, but also fungi, viruses, archaea. Most of the time, your gut has more bacteria. You should not have fungi or parasites and whatnot, but it's very comprehensive. So we see all not just the taxa, which means the microbes that are there, but also the functions. We don't just care about what bacteria or fungi is present, but what they're doing is more important. So this is where I see microbiome testing going, is functions of the gut is becoming more important than the taxa itself. So what I mentioned, butyrate function, GABA function, cellulose digestion function, these things are more important than just pointing out if you have E. coli or Salmonella or bifidobacteria.
Just one last question on the science part, and then I'd love to switch gears to business and technology. Question I have is, I've seen various reports. It's been a while actually, but once Economist ran a cover story on the microbiome. This was many, many years ago. Again, so the science has moved way forward from that point. But my question is, they say that in the human body, I've seen numbers from either 60%, 70%, 90% is gut microbiome DNA, and 10% is human DNA. What is the accurate number,
That number is actually 50-50 now. So we're 1-to-1 human cells and bacteria cells, if that makes sense.
Very interesting. I can't stop myself from asking another question. The founder of Biome, so he talks about a theory that the microbiome created the human being. So they came together, and any thoughts on that?
I mean, you can go into the philosophical aspects of things. I wouldn't disagree too much. I don't know which is the origin, but if you think about how much bacteria is in and on us, it's a lot, right? I would say, I don't know, the actual number is 1-to-1, not 90% to 10%. That's an outdated number.
Mm-hmm.
I'll send you the actual article that updates this ratio. A lot of people still get it wrong.
Mm.
But I always think, and I tell my kids, when we're eating, we're actually feeding our microbiome, which is true, our gut microbiome, right? Because a lot of fiber that we eat, the rough fish especially, goes through our guts and is indigestible. And it's there actually for the microbiome, the gut bacteria, to digest, right? For beneficial functions. So when we eat, the reason why we eat certain fibers is to feed the right gut bacteria for beneficial functions. To that point, maybe we are half bacteria, half human. I don't know which is first. It's a lot to go say the bacteria came first, but I wouldn't be surprised. In our test, because we do whole genome sequencing, we basically categorize every single microbe that we find in your gut to a known friendly microbiome, beneficial function, a known unfriendly microbiome. And sometimes this category of unfriendly could be safe at low levels, but not great and cause inflammation at high levels. For example, E. coli. There are many, many different strains of E. coli. It's really important to differentiate strains. That's something that our test can do. We do strain level sequencing, and also we can see toxins. So there are neutral commensal E. coli. And then there's E. coli that are very pathogenic and toxic, right? So we can differentiate that. And then there's a third category called variable bacteria. So that means something like your P. vulgaris this that could be like in low amounts, it's found in every healthy individual, but in individuals who have autoimmune or are constipated, it's found in very high amounts, for example. So that's a variable category. And then there's the fourth category in our tests. You can see all of this called unknown microbiome. So the scientists have not discovered if this is a good bacteria or bad, or is it variable, right? I would say most of the time when we see adult microbiomes, maybe 10, 20% are unknown. So as you mentioned earlier, we are very frank in our tests. We don't overstate the science. If we don't know about the bacteria, we say we don't know what it is. And over time, science is just going to improve and we're going to keep categorizing these microbiomes or like defining them, and then we would update the tests to reflect that, right? We have seen certainly in some non-westernized communities who do our tests that their unknowns are like 40%, and that's really high. So it's hard to say, like you said right earlier, like there's no one universal healthy microbiome. We don't know if the 40% of unknown is good or bad, but generally we think it's very diverse. It's kind of like a missing microbiome in our Western society that we think it's it could be mapped to a healthy microbiome. But in general, we see, again, we do serve a lot of North American customers here. We do certainly have some European and Asian customers too. We tend to see about 30% unknowns. Maybe 30% is still really high. About 20%, I would say 10 to 20% on average.
I'd love to switch gears to the business side of things. So how does Tiny Health make money? You've done these 80,000 tests now. I'm assuming when you say 80,000, it's direct to consumer. It's in partnership with other companies that you're doing this. What is the business model?
We started about 3.5 years ago with the baby gut test was our flagship test because that was the white space in the market. We also had the maternal, vaginal, and gut tests because, again, like similar to my story, right? If the mom didn't have the right microbiome, then she needs to course correct her microbiome before passing it on to her baby. And then very quickly, the dads wanted to do it too, because we found out that through some literature that dads contribute 25% of their microbiomes in the child's life in the first year of life. So if the mom had a vaginal birth, it's about 75% at birth, and it goes down to 25% at the first year. If the baby was born C-section, mom's contributing also 25%. So similar contribution from mom and dad through a C-section. So then we started selling a Tiny Health family membership because we feel like the whole family should be looking after their gut health, right? Because they're all passing their gut microbiome between family members. So even if you try to course correct your infant's microbiome, guess what? Your child's going to eventually eat the same foods you eat, live in the same environment, breathe the same air. So if there's something in your environment and your diet that's not right, then your child's microbiome is going to look like yours as an adult, right? So the adult microbiome is the proxy for what your kid's microbiome will look like. So we started selling memberships so that the whole family gets into this mode of testing because we believe that you should test and not guess. Some people are taking the wrong supplements. They're taking the wrong probiotic they don't need. Maybe they already have the healthy bacteria. They're missing certain other functions. Some kids do a lot of antibiotics and they need a way to restore it. We help with that. So the family membership has been really successful. I would say majority of our business is still D2C, the parent audience. It wasn't until last year we came up with the B2B model, the Powered by Tiny model.
Mm-hmm.
And we started getting a lot of inbound from corporations, CROs wanting to use our kit for clinical trials and clinical studies. So we figured that, great, our test can be a great way to democratize access to microbiome data, both gut and vaginal in clinical studies, right? Because I think a lot of companies, supplement companies or companies with a certain protocol for GI care are lacking clinical evidence backing their supplement, their protocol. They can use our kits to show the baseline of the patient or participant, and then the protocol or the supplement over 3 months, 6 months, whatever their care program is, and then retest. And so we are helping a ton of companies do clinical trials that way. We're working with CROs as well. So that's one part of the business. The other part of the B2B business is we co-brand with companies. So they become our channel distribution partners. But we also work with major hospital systems, for example, Mayo Clinic's Longevity Health Clinic. They've come to us and creating a co-branded test, a Mayo Clinic gut test, and we're customizing a wellness index for them based on a paper they publish in 2024.
Very interesting.
So
Okay.
really excited about that because Mayo Clinic is, as you know, very picky about who they choose to partner with. And the fact that they picked Tiny Health as their microbiome test speaks a lot about our credibility, our science, and our evidence behind the test.
In all this time, Cheryl, was the GI industry involved?
Not quite. So we do have an arm on the B2B side of the business, also going to practitioner conferences, giving CE, CME talks for credit so that practitioners who do want to keep their continuing education can come and listen to new innovations in the microbiome. However, most doctors who come are the functional medicine practitioners, integrative practitioners, holistic health practitioners. Sometimes you do get some GI doctors involved. And we hope that more and more will come. And we would love the opportunity to present at grand rounds at hospitals to GI groups. One doctor we just brought on is Dr. Qian Yuan from Mass General in Boston. He's a pediatric GI specialist.
Mhm.
And he sees a lot of kids with complex allergy issues. He started using our tests maybe about a year and a half ago and was really impressed with the results. So he kind of like the Angelica case that you read in the Washington Post. There are these groups of parents whose kids have really complex allergy issues, can't solve them through traditional pharmaceuticals. And when they do find imbalances in their kid's gut through a tiny health test and do the dietary supplement lifestyle changes, their kids start to feel better, symptoms start to go away, and then their gut results come back really much better than before. So they take these tests to their GI specialists, and usually the GI specialists are like, I don't know what this is. Is this horoscope? We do get we're met with a lot of skepticism, and I understand why, because again, this stuff is not taught in medical school, right? So, and there's a lot of snake oil out there for sure. So I understand the sentiment out there, but then when doctors see symptoms improving, when previously they just couldn't help the kid, and with the Tiny Health Action Plan, the kids just magically, not in all cases, but in most cases, like 60-70% of kids do feel better. They turn around and they well, I want to talk to Tiny Health. I want to learn more about the test. So we have this whole arm educating practitioners for free, basically how to interpret our tests, how to use our tests clinically, how our, kind of guiding them through our platform that's very evidence-based, because everything we recommend from a intervention perspective is linked to PubMed articles. There's usually at least 5 to 10 citations linked, and everything is based on human studies. We try not to use mice studies, but we gain a lot of credibility with these doctors. So Dr. Yan was a fan and was so involved. He's now involved in our next clinical study. We are publishing one prospective clinical study with a control arm soon that showed over 80% reduced odds of eczema in babies born by a C-section. We're doing another larger study with Dr. Yuan at Mass Gen, and we just brought him on as a scientific advisor, a medical advisor at Tiny Health.
In all these years and in the tests that you've done, what would be one or two big insights that you've gained personally?
Mm-hmm.
Like what really surprised you about what you've discovered, or maybe even broadening that a little bit about the healthcare industry itself?
I kind of alluded to at the beginning of the podcast that we assume that a lot of issues with our gut today is high pathogenic bacteria or parasites. There's a lot of influencers that are so obsessed with parasite cleanses. I'm sure you've heard, right? And we don't know that that's the right approach. We see most of the problems in people who have gut issues or GI issues is the lack of beneficial functions. So that's, I think, one of the most surprising things is we're just very depleted of beneficial functions and taxa. So we need to replenish it. And the best way to replenish it is through eating healthy prebiotic fibers and fruits and vegetables, right? The right amount of protein, and not like processed foods. Don't do a lot of the emulsifiers. It's less about the pathogenic bacteria. So if you don't have beneficial function, it gives room for the pathogenic bacteria and the gut inflammation to happen, right? So rather than destroying the bad, which is what our society is very focused on, even our medical approach, conventional or functional, even functional medicine doctors use harsh antimicrobials and herbs to kill. So I would say the biggest eye opener for me is the shift in paradigm shift from killing to restoring, if that makes sense, right? Sometimes if the gut is really bad, and we've seen some really bad guts with very high pathogens, gut inflammation, and persisting symptoms and conditions, maybe in that event, you can approach to kill and then replenish. But in most cases, especially in peds, because their guts are so sensitive, we highly recommend the approach of restoring and boosting beneficial to kick out the pathogenic bacteria. And if that doesn't work, then you go to the kill approach. So instead of coming from kill, restore, you come from restore, replenish, and then if that doesn't work, you kill. I think that has worked tremendously well in peds, especially infants and kids who have these GI issues and chronic conditions and eczema, allergies, and all that. Adults, that can work too. But yeah, we try to kill less.
I think this is exciting science, and I'm curious to know what your reading is on why the GI industry is not more involved as you'd expect.
I think it's a time factor. Certainly, there is an issue with different sequencing modalities, different sequencing methods. Like, for example, you mentioned RNA. Viome uses RNA, which we feel like it's a very temporal sequencing method. It's great for trying to figure out in the lab immediate response to a drug or food, but it's so temporal, it's not reliable. So if you do an RNA test today with a stool sample today, and you do one tomorrow, you're going to get completely different results. So it's really hard to pinpoint recommending a diet or a supplement based on something so temporal, right? The gene expression of the microbes.
Mm-hmm.
With DNA sequencing, again, we're measuring the DNA of the microbes, not the humans. It's more stable. So, we see it takes 2 to 3 months to change the composition or the functions of an adult microbiome. In kids, you can see that changing within a week or two. So really fast changes in kids, which is why the science is stronger in peds and especially infants. For adults, I think, I think this is where it's hard, right? Like to do dietary interventions on adults. It's easier in kids because you're feeding the kids. In adults, it's really hard to control diet and supplements and things like that. So I would say evidence needs to catch up for the adult population and using one methodology, right? One of the issues with all these published studies every month is that they're all using different methodology, they're all using different DNA extraction kits, and that can introduce some biases up to like maybe 10%, sometimes 20%. So that's one of the reasons. But we're aiming to be the de facto gut microbiome test for adults and kids for all ages. So we're early in the game, about to approach 100,000 samples here. But I would advise if you're using a gut test, a stool test, to stick with the same stool test for longitudinal tracking. Because if you're changing tests all the time, you're not going to get the same benchmark. You're not going to get the same baseline.
I want to switch gears to technology, and I'm curious to know if you use AI in your company and how you might be using AI, and has it accelerated our understanding of the microbiome?
Yeah, I mean, before AI was here, we've already been using machine learning to train our algorithms to find patterns, predictive patterns, right? I think AI is great from a large language model perspective, it's very conversational. And so from a UI perspective to humans, it's very easy for someone to kind of chat with an AI and help them understand things better, right? So I would say we've been using, in a way, machine learning to train our models for a very long time, since the start of the company. Certainly AI has helped to accelerate research discovery and kind of pattern recognition and things like that within the science team, publication of papers we're working on, drafting those papers and things like that. So that's from a scientific perspective. And we think AI can be leveraged to discover in the future consortiums of microbiome that are linked to certain diseases, right? Because we're pretty good at predicting eczema and allergies now in kids. Maybe in the future, adult chronic conditions, sleep issues, and whatnot, right? Depression issues. And on the other hand, on AI for customers, we are baking that into the interpretation of the results. Because at the end of the day, a lay person getting a tiny health test results, it's still pretty overwhelming to read all the bacteria names that you're not familiar with. We're one of the most user-friendly gut tests in the market, much friendlier than a lot of the doctor ordered stool tests that are PCR driven, that only doctors can interpret. We built this tool for parents, right? And so busy parents. So we try to simplify the language and link a lot of citations to it, which is what a lot of people like about our tests. But at the end of the day, people want to converse. Like, I have this issue and I can't eat gluten, or I can't do dairy, recommend products that I can eat, or take supplements based on my gut results. So that will come, working on that right now, where we are building an AI chat, almost like a microbiome specialist that's driven by AI. And basically the goal in the future, through some of our B2B partnerships, is that we have this AI kind of LLM is the most trained in microbiome science, as well as the interpretation and intervention of it.
From your lens, Cheryl, what does a precision medicine driven future look like?
So we see some people taking like a vitamin D pill, omega-3, or a daily probiotic, right? But we feel like that's the wrong way to do it, especially with the technology that is becoming more accessible to us at a more affordable manner. For example, we have this crop of companies popping up, health assessment companies or biomarker tracking companies, with Function Health leading the path. There's Superpower, Mito Health, 100 Health. There's so many of these where you're paying $3.99 or $4.99 and getting 120 biomarkers, right? So we believe that that is the future of precision medicine. Are you lacking vitamin D? Do you need zinc? And be able to supplement what's lacking in our diet. Ideally, again, we're fulfilling all these things through whole foods, right? Natural whole foods diet. But, there's also issues in our food supply chain, in monoculturing, crops becoming depleted in nutrients, right? So sometimes some supplements are necessary. For example, we spend 90% of our time indoors now, so we don't get as much vitamin D through sun exposure.
Sure.
So I think everyone kind of needs the vitamin D, unless you're spending 50% of your time at least outdoors, right? And then a probiotic too. People are taking this multi-probiotic, but like, I have sufficient bifidobacteria now. Remember I told you I didn't have any bifidobacteria? Now I have about 3% without ongoing supplement, because I did the prebiotic to make it colonize, and I'm maintaining it through diet now. So I don't have to take ongoing bifidobacteria probiotic. But I actually have high E. coli now, and I have the toxic kind from a trip to Bali last year. So I'm taking a Bacillus subtilis probiotic. So I know specifically what probiotic I need and what prebiotic I need, and maybe postbiotic too. I'm trying to get my butyrate function up, so I'm taking probutyrate supplements. So this is the future of precision medicine. Depending on what symptoms you have, what conditions you're trying to work through, what you're lacking in your blood biomarkers or your gut health biomarkers, people should be guided on like what diets, what supplements, and what lifestyles to change.
How often do you test?
We are powering a lot of these health assessment companies, Superpower, Mito Health, Joy, and Blokes. We're powering a lot of these health assessment companies. So I have memberships with a lot of them. I would say I test at least every 6 months because I'm a member of so many of them. I test every quarter, technically. And then for my own gut, if I don't have any issues, and for my kids, I test every 6 months just to be proactive about it. Because I had a diarrhea episode in Bali last year, I test more often now, like every 2 months now, because I'm trying to work through the high E. coli issue, and I've got inflammation from that. One day of infection can last for a year. So sometimes if you make a trip and you get sick, that bug can persist for a while and cause a lot of issues if you don't take care of restoring it.
How are you working in the longevity space?
So a lot of people want to live healthier, not just longer. So it's about health span, not lifespan, right? And so mitochondrial health is becoming really popular. Cellular health is now, there's research now pointing to how cancer is a factor of mitochondrial or cellular degradation, right? So there's a lot of companies now trying to focus on cellular health, red light therapy. There are certain supplements that can improve mitochondrial health. For example, urolithium A. Urolithium A is one of those substances that is produced in the gut, actually, and can really help with mitochondrial health. There's just so much clinical research around urolithium A that speaks to even reducing pregnancy risks like preeclampsia or gestational diabetes and things like that, preterm labor. But beyond that, the longevity customers are really kind of catching up onto the benefits of urolithium A. So there are a few companies now creating these supplements. One in particular called Timeline. They claim that only 30% of the population can produce urolithium A. Basically, it's a substance that you can get through eating a lot of pomegranates. But one can only drink so much pomegranate, right? So we actually just published that metric. So we can now measure urolithium A production in your gut. So we published that about 3 weeks ago, and we're about to do the data science on, is it true that only 30% of the population can produce UA? It's really magical, kind of not like the whole longevity space is crazy about right now for improving mitochondrial health. The supplements being sold in this space they're so expensive. So I think this is an example of you can do a test and see if you really need it. If you have high levels of it, you have good bacteria that can produce UA, then you may not need supplementation, right? Or maybe you are one of the 70% who don't have it and you need to take it for protecting your cellular health, mitochondrial health, and hence improving longevity. That's one of many, many other markers. Because we own our bioinformatics pipeline, we patented our analysis of the tool. And a lot of other companies, some companies that you've spoken to, they don't own their bioinformatics pipeline, so they can't move as quickly as we can in terms of creating these metrics that are based on research publications and as well as what the longevity clinics want to see.
Have you come across anyone working on researching or anyone working on the microbiome to detect colon cancer itself?
Not quite, but we have worked with doctors who want to use our tests as a companion test to oncology, for example. So there's some emerging research showing that if you course correct an imbalanced gut before cancer treatment, you can improve the response rate of the treatment. We're about to work with this doctor who's doing that. And then also some doctors doing FMT treatment, fecal matter transplant. Again, fixing the gut imbalances first before doing that can really improve the response rate. So there's a lot of use cases there that we would love to partner with more organizations doing these treatments to prove and publish efficacy of course correcting gut before treatment.
I do have a final set of questions on just starting up, Cheryl, but is there anything that you think we haven't covered? I'm sure there's a lot, but is there anything that you'd like to share to the GI community that will be helpful for them?
So I think because we started in the first 1,000 days, where the microbiome is very low in diversity and very easy to categorically say if this is a healthy infant microbiome or unhealthy infant microbiome. Again, because the only job of the infant is to digest breast milk, right? So the signs in the infancy is quite clear. And then from there, we've mapped the functions and how the gut evolves and develops and matures. By the time the child is 5 years old, the gut of the child is adult-like maturation. So pretty much we can actually map if the child's gut is a 6-month old, is it a 12-month old, is it 2 years old, is it 5-year old? We can actually predict with fairly high accuracy. And that's also why we're able to map out features of a healthy microbiome into adulthood. Right, again, coming back to, is there a one universal healthy microbiome? No, but we can map out features of a healthy microbiome, right? And then down to now we have this research project on our website called Microbiome Age. So we are trying to catalog microbiomes 50 years and above. So can we predict down to the 55-year-old accuracy? Do you have the microbiome of 60-year-old, 80-year-old? There's research showing that centenarian guts, people who live up to 100 years old, they have some of the components of a healthy microbiome in the infant. And people who don't live that long, their guts degrade. There is a degradation of healthy bacteria in an aging gut microbiome. We want to be able to start, again, continuing in our work in longevity and healthy aging. We're accelerating research around the aging microbiome and what it takes to actually live longer. So I think that's a very exciting area of research.
Cheryl, what suggestions or advice do you have for entrepreneurs, especially physician entrepreneurs, who are probably listening to you right now and thinking, how could I take advantage of what's happening in this space? It's exciting, and how does one take steps that possibly you took to either build companies or partner with companies like yours and go further?
Yeah, so if you're a physician and you want to build a company, I would say a lot of physicians have technical skills and knowledge, right, in a specific domain. And what's often missing from this group of maybe physician entrepreneurs is the business side and marketing side of knowledge, because you can come up with a great solution for a problem, which should be the basis of the company idea. But you need to test in a smart way the market need or the market sort of like language, right? So for example, I knew for myself, the baby gut test was something that was a white space in the market. I thought C-section babies or moms who gave birth to C-section babies would kind of look it up. So we did a lot of Google search terms on C-section. Nobody bought it. What ended up happening was eczema. We tried eczema allergies, and then our tests sold like hotcakes. So we then knew that a lot of parents, so with so many babies who have eczema, it is really dire, because when your baby is itching and scratching their face and they can't sleep and they're crying, and some babies' eczema is so severe that they bleed, it's just an awful sight. Moms will do, or dads will do anything for the baby, right? So it turns out that the C-section use case was not really a prominent use case. Through Google search, again, putting a small budget towards keyword terms that resonate with your audience helps in the early days to figure out who are your core audience that really care about this solution. So we found our start with eczema, and then allergies, and then sleep issues, colicky symptoms. So a lot of one by one, we've kind of gone through the baby issues. And now finally, we're getting word of mouth around to the C-section community that, okay, well, if you've had a C-section, you should do a tiny health test. So I would say I would encourage people to do small experiments. I see a lot of founders, maybe first-time founders, throw a big budget on marketing, hiring an agency to just do a big splash launch. I would advise against that. I would advise to really test out what message resonates with the core audience that you think you're solving problems for.
My final question, Cheryl, is where do you see Tiny Health go from here, let's say 5 years from now?
We, in a couple of years, maybe even next year, we want to be synonymous with gut health testing or gut health. So maybe pick some time next year. If you ask anyone about gut health, they would ask you if you've done a tiny health test. We think everyone should be doing a tiny health test to look into their gut proactively. In 5 years, there's so many use cases that we can go into in terms of discovery of patterns, like I mentioned, predictive biomarkers before it happens. And then perhaps with that discovery, we can get into therapeutics as well. I'm also really excited about the FMT space. As I mentioned, there are a few companies that are approved right now for C. diff, but the use cases beyond C. diff can be massive. And I think there's something around autologous FMT. So your own stool sample, kind of restoring your own gut because of antibiotic overuse, especially in kids, right? So if your kid has an ear infection and we're given antibiotics, it's really destroying their gut. But if you had a stool sample from before the antibiotics was administered and you turn it into capsules and then you're restoring your own child's gut post antibiotics, how wonderful would that be? So it's something that we certainly are thinking about.
Excellent. And I am looking forward to that kind of a future for the industry itself. But Cheryl Sew Hoy, thank you so much for talking to me and sharing all these insights and also about tiny health. It was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Praveen. Really happy to be here.